All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here for our third session in the Women Getting Wise About Wealth series. My name's Aviva Sapers, and I'm joined by my colleague, Holly Knight. And today we're here to talk about budgeting and how it ties into your financial plan. If we hear snoring, we know we're off track. Just a quick comment. Let's keep it interactive with questions along the way, either by raising your hand as we're a small enough group or by putting questions in the chat. We will have time at the end for Q&A as well. Are you moving the slides? Because you're not in presenter view here.
I have to share it probably, right?
You do. But while she's loading it up, we're just going to begin with a quick introduction of Sapers and Wallach. We're a third generation family business, and we've been here since 1932 and consider ourselves a full service employee benefits and financial planning firm. We are here to help individual and corporate clients protect their families, provide peace of mind, as well as help people achieve their financial goals.
As a full service financial service firm, we have several areas of expertise and a dedicated team of professionals who are passionate about what they do. We help people in areas such as group benefits, retirement planning, individual insurance, charitable strategies, property and casualty, wealth management, and executive benefits. So now we're going to switch gears and we're going to focus on why we're all here today.
Today, we're going to explore the topic of budgeting and financial planning. We're going to start with your money why. Next, we'll talk about budgeting and debt reduction. Once we cover those things, we'll talk about how it ties into financial planning. And lastly, we'll talk about what you can do next. We'll offer some financial insight and education to help you become budget superstars, and we'll provide you with some tips and resources that we'll share on our website following the session, and we will send out to you as well. So let's get started.
So understanding why you're budgeting in the first place is a really good starting point. Essentially, your why is all about your financial goals, and knowing and defining them is going to be your roadmap towards achieving them. So it's important to ask yourself a few questions. What do you imagine for your future? Do you want to buy a home, start a family, help put your kids through college, maybe be free of student loan debt or put the brakes on credit card habits, retire early so you can fill your time doing things that you love? To accomplish any of these things, you should start with your financial goals and prioritize them. And then you can determine whether your budget allows you the freedom to accomplish the goals. If you happen to be married or living with someone, you should set your own goals first and then consider discussing them with your partner and working together towards achieving them. Now, setting goals is one thing, but transforming those dreams into reality is really where most people struggle. When people are overwhelmed or intimidated by financial processes, they tend to do nothing. So here are 5 steps that you can take that will help you clearly identify your goals or your money why, and tell you how to achieve them.
Starting with the first step, give your money a job. Think about your days at work. You have things you need to accomplish this week and things you hope you can finish in the future. The same is true with financial goals. What kind of life do you want now, later? The job of your money is to help you achieve these. Second, you should categorize each financial goal as short, mid, or long term. We will provide you with a goal-setting worksheet in our library for you to use as you identify your short-term financial goals, which are usually 6 months to 5 years, mid-term financial goals 5 to 10 years, and long-term financial goals more than 10 years. Then we want to target a date for each of these financial goals for when you plan on achieving them. Being specific helps. My wife likes to say someday is not a day of the week. Even if you adjust the date over time, it's important to be specific. You have the right to move a date out, but be specific when you set it up. If you have a toddler who's heading to college in 2035, you have a target date for your college savings goal. Want to take a trip across Europe for your 10th wedding anniversary? You know what time frame you're working with. You'll be able to add target dates to your financial goals worksheet, which will be a PDF that we attach and send around to you at the end. Fourth, prioritize each financial goal between your critical needs and your wants. Because when it comes to goal setting, if push comes to shove, you need to know what to fund first. So on your worksheet, you want to label things critical, need, or want. So let's say you have a short-term goal to build up your emergency fund and it's critical in your mind. But another short-term financial goal is to upgrade your car, which is running fine. It's just a want. If funds became tight in a given month, that should help you figure out where to put your money. Also, for number 5, you need to know how much you have versus what you still need to save. Do you have money in a Roth IRA, 401k, 403b, or IRA? If so, add those numbers to your worksheet under your retirement-related goals. Note, some goals may not have current savings. That's okay. You have to start somewhere. And then, as an example, if you wanted to buy a home in 2 years and you needed an additional $15,000 as a down payment, you divide the $15,000 by 24 months, that's 2 years, and that'll show you that you need to save about $625 more per month to achieve that goal. Before we move on to the next section, it's important to identify what qualifies as a short, mid, and long-term goal.
So as a best practice, consider the following structure from top to bottom: short, mid, and long-term savings. So let's start with short-term. The first short-term budgeting you should plan for is an emergency savings fund. It's pointless to plan for mid or long-term goals if something happens and you're out of work for an extended amount of time and you have no buffer to pay for monthly expenses. You'd have to dig into your other savings buckets, and that's going to impact your long-term goals. It's wise to budget small amounts from every paycheck to fund expenses you know are coming up. For example, your car breaks down or a home appliance needs to be replaced. These are things that you're planning for ahead of time, short term. Budgeting small amounts from each paycheck into a separate liquid account will dramatically reduce the stress typically associated with those types of situations. Short-term savings should be easy to access, like a bank savings account. Saving in an HSA or a health savings health savings account.
Yes.
Health savings account. It can be another more tax efficient way of saving for regular medical expenses if your organization offers one. The next short-term savings is for immediate needs and wants, such as auto expenses, clothing, vacations or holiday spending. As well as some bigger short-term goals, like saving up for, a big family vacation, so you just want to break it down into, short-term, meaning 9, 10 months or less. And then the next one is midterm savings. This is things like buying a new car, buying or renovating a home, starting a family and planning for maternity or paternity leave, college savings for your children, if that's going to be part of your strategy. Because your time horizon for needing access to this money is a bit longer, you may want to consider a different savings vehicle outside of your bank account. College 529 plans and brokerage accounts, for example, they allow you to invest your savings in securities like stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, to increase the expected return versus just a regular savings account. Now, this approach does subject your savings to market risk, not associated with bank accounts, but the longer time horizon for this type of saving can really improve your chance of success. Finally, long-term savings for retirement is critically important for living a healthy financial lifestyle. This would include taking advantage of savings for retirement in your 401k, 403b, Roth IRAs, or annuities. Because the time horizon is much longer, liquidity is less of a concern. You're not trying to take that money out in the short term. A rule of thumb, experts say we should, and experts, I say industry experts, they don't always agree on many things, but they do agree on this one. They say we should be saving somewhere between 10 to 15% of our income out of every paycheck. And thankfully, having an auto deferral plan through work really makes that process simple. And it gives you some great tax benefits, both in the traditional or a Roth retirement plan. Other long-term goals could include leaving a legacy, covering the cost of healthcare and retirement, purchasing a vacation home, or paying off a mortgage. Of course, as always, investors should consider their age, their risk tolerance, or in other words, do you have the emotional and financial capacity to invest in riskier investments, and their timeline. when evaluating the risk that's associated with that type of long-term investing. So how do we figure out how much money we have to allocate or budget for these competing financial priorities?
Well, we will get to that shortly, but the first thing we wanted to really focus on is an emergency fund. We want to touch on the need to establish an emergency fund as a cornerstone of short-term savings, because it can vary from person to person. We feel that before you focus on any of your financial goals, it's crucial to have about 3 to 6 months of living expenses in an emergency fund. And we encourage you to be closer to the 6 months number. In talking about short-term needs, there's an easy way to prioritize what needs you should focus on first. Here's how to measure them. Is the expense unexpected, unavoidable, or urgent? Unexpected can mean something like you've lost your job and need to pay bills. Unavoidable may mean you need to figure out if it makes sense to fix your broken refrigerator or buy a new one. And finally, an expense for urgent needs could be something like your dentist just recommended you get 2 new crowns, not the kind on your head. Here's what your emergency savings is for. Stuff like is not for. Stuff like a new sofa, a country club membership, or a new motorcycle. Those aren't exactly emergencies. When asking how much you might need in your emergency fund, I'd say set mini goals. Start by aiming to save $1,000. Don't get hung up on a big number. The important thing is just to get started. Then continue to add until you have a month's worth of expenses. Your end goal is to set aside, as we said before, 3 to 6 months of your expenses, but you may want to save more than 6 months worth if you're the sole breadwinner or have unpredictable income. Ideally, 6 to 12 months is the target. And then you might ask, where should I put the money? So it depends how disciplined you are, but you want to keep your emergency fund in a bank account that's liquid and accessible, but not too accessible. This is where I say it depends on your discipline. If you put the money in a separate savings account that you can access online, but not from an ATM, where you might be tempted to withdraw it, out of sight, out of mind, that would be a good place to put it. You might look for a high yield savings account with a minimum balance requirements, though high yield isn't very high these days. You can compare online banking and savings and money market rates to find out what's the best rate for you. So you may ask, how do you start the emergency fund? 2 options would be: 1, to automate it, have the money direct deposited from your paycheck into a savings account. If you set aside $25 a week, at the end of 2 years, you'd have $2,600 saved. To build it faster, you might consider transferring money from a bonus that you might receive or a tax refund when you get that back. If you have surplus cash at the end of the month, add that too. Those dollars are meant specifically for goals like this. Having funds for an emergency can take a huge weight off your shoulders when you have a surprise expense, something that or making it more of an inconvenience to deal with than a financial hardship because you've stashed away some money for these types of things. As you can see, there are several things to think about when it comes to setting your goals and building the blueprint for your financial independence. But now let's focus our attention on the heart of the conversation. A favorite of, not mine, but some people's, budgeting. So we've talked about setting goals using the financial goals worksheet, which you haven't seen, but it's going to be part of the resources we provide, and then identifying and prioritizing them into short, mid, and long-term categories. Now think about this current savings you're putting towards each of your financial goals. If you come up short and there's no money for a goal, how do you fund it? Yep, you guessed it, the dreaded B word, budgeting. Ask yourself, where can I cut back? What are my priorities? Because when you find extra money to save, invest, and potentially grow, goals become more attainable. So can we get a show of hands? How many of you are budgeters? Not seeing any hands here. Oh, I see a small hand, and some people are not showing the screen, so I have no idea. All right, well, so one strategy is to kind of back into your budget. Some people resist doing a budget because they think it's going to restrict them from spending the way they want. The reality is that most of us overspend just because we don't have a plan. Think of your budget as a tool that organizes your monthly cash flow to include your saving and investing goals. To back into it, You pay critical expenses first, then decide what to do with the rest. That's a shift in thinking. Use a budget worksheet, which once again, you'll have access to on our website, and jot down what's coming in and what's going out. Look at recent bills, bank and credit card statements to find the details. It's also good to consider your retirement savings and investments to get a clear picture of your current financial situation. Adjust, prioritize, revise as needed. Fixed expenses are bills that you're committed to paying, like a mortgage, car payment, or utilities. Discretionary means you have some control over what or how much you spend, like clothing, hobbies, travel, etc. Make note of your monthly take-home pay. Then subtract your new/revised budget. See what's left over that you can put towards your goals. For each of your goals, check whether it's already funded or needs more savings, and if it's a critical goal. Then decide how much of the extra money you found can be put towards your critical short, mid, and long-term goals. Log it on your worksheet that we'll provide for you. And once you've made good progress towards your critical goals, start tackling the rest of them.
So yeah, budgeting is all about managing inflows and outflows, right? If asked how much do you spend each month, can you answer the question off the top of your head? If not, then creating a budget is a great first step. Expenses typically fall into two buckets, as Aviva mentioned, fixed expenses and discretionary expenses. So fixed expenses are monthly expenses that provide you and your family with shelter, food, clothing. It typically includes things like rent or mortgage payments, utilities, transportation, and food as well. I said that, but discretionary expenses are things you may spend money on monthly, but they're not necessary. This includes hobbies, entertainment, travel, gifting, and add these together and you can come up with your total monthly expenses. Now, compare that with your total household take-home income, and you can A, determine if you're living beyond your means or within them, and B, whether you have extra income you could apply towards your financial goals, short, midterm, or long-term. Where does debt fit into your expenses? Is it a fixed expense or a discretionary expense? We're about to discuss that, but first tell me, do you think all debt is bad? Give me a thumbs up or hands up if you think all debt is bad. Shaking heads, nodding heads, not all bad, not all is bad. Well, if you said no, you're correct. Aviva, could you help us understand that a little bit more?
Sure. There's certainly an argument to be made that no debt is good debt, but borrowing money and taking on debt is the only way many people can afford to purchase important big ticket items like a home. There's another end of the spectrum that involves debt that doesn't have the potential to add value, but in fact drains your assets. While it's easy to differentiate between these two extremes, some other debts are harder to judge. So what is good debt? Good debt is often shown or exemplified in the old adage, it takes money to make money. If the debt you take on helps you generate income and build your net worth, then that can be considered positive. So can debt that improves your and your family's life in other significant ways. Among the things often worth carrying debt for are education. And in general, the more education an individual has, the greater their earning potential. Education also has a positive correlation with the ability to find employment. Better educated workers are more likely to be employed in good paying jobs and tend to have an easier time finding new ones should the need arise. An investment in a college or technical degree can often pay for itself within a few years of entering the workforce. However, not all degrees are of equal value, so it's worth considering both the short and long-term job prospects for any field of study that appeals to you, and you may want to share this with your children. Another area worth investing is your own business. Money that you borrow to start a business can also come under the heading of good debt. Being your own boss is often both financially and psychologically rewarding and can also be very hard work. Like paying for education, starting your own business also comes with risks. Many ventures fail, but your chances for success are greater if you choose a field that you're passionate and knowledgeable about. One other area, your home or other real estate. There are a variety of ways to make money in real estate. On the residential front, the simplest often involves taking out a mortgage to buy a home, living in the home for a few decades, and then selling the home at a profit. In the meantime, you also enjoy the freedom of having your own home, plus an assortment of potential tax breaks not available to renters. Residential real estate also can be used to generate income by renting it out, and commercial real estate can be a source of cash flow and eventual capital gain if you know what you're doing.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about bad debt. It's generally considered to be bad debt if you are borrowing to purchase a depreciating asset. In other words, if it won't go up in value or generate income, then you shouldn't go into debt to buy it. For example, buying a car. While you might find it impossible to live without a car, borrowing money to buy one isn't a great idea from a financial perspective. By the time you leave the car lot, the vehicle already is worth less than when you bought it. If you need to borrow to buy a car, then look for a loan with either low or no interest. You'll still be investing a large amount of money in a depreciating asset, but at least you won't be paying interest on it. Clothes and consumables. It's often said that clothes are worth less than half of what consumers pay for them. If you've ever visited a used clothing store, you'll see that half is being kind of generous. Of course, you need clothes and food and furniture and all kinds of other things, but borrowing to buy them using a high interest credit card isn't a good use of debt. Use a credit card for convenience, but make sure you're able to pay off your balance at the end of the month to avoid interest charges. Otherwise, try to pay cash. Now, some special considerations. Not all debt can be so easily classified as good or bad. It often depends on your own financial situation or other factors. Certain types of debt may be good for some people, but bad for others. For example, borrowing to pay off debt. Now, for consumers who are already in debt, taking out a debt consolidation loan from a bank or other reputable lender can be beneficial. Debt consolidation loans typically have a lower interest rate than most credit cards, so they allow you to pay off existing debt and save money on future interest payments. The key, however, is making sure that you use the cash to pay off the debts and not for additional spending. Another one is borrowing to invest. If you have an account with a brokerage firm, then you may have access to a margin account, which allows you to borrow money from the brokerage to purchase securities like stocks and bonds. Buying on margin, as it's called, can make you money if the security goes up in value, but before you have to pay back the loan, or it's going to cost you money if the security loses value. Obviously, this kind of borrowing isn't for inexperienced investors or those who can't afford to lose that money. Now that we've identified the different kinds of debt, let's talk about some strategies to finding the right balance, right? Here are 5 tips to help you crush your debt. Know what you owe. It's like writing down everything you eat when you're trying to get healthy. You do it to know where you stand, right? For debt, write down the balance, the interest rate, and the minimum payment. You can use the debt management worksheet, which we'll provide to you to help you do this. Number 2, pay it down. Rank your debts in order of size or interest rate. Then decide how to tackle it. So here are some examples. The snowball method. Focus on paying down the account with the smallest balance first. Keep making the minimum payments on the other ones, though, as you do that. Once the first is paid, move on to the next debt with the lowest balance and put all that extra into that. This might be the right method if you're motivated by seeing smaller balances disappear. The second one would be the higher interest rate method. I've also heard this called the avalanche method. So you're going to focus on the debt with the highest interest rate first. Once you pay one, you work on the next highest interest rate, and so on and so forth. Make sure you continue making minimum payments on the other debt as well, though. If you want to pay less over the life of your loans, this might be the method for you. When you pay off higher interest debt, higher interest rate debt, mathematically, it generally gives you more long-term purchasing power. But ultimately, you need to do what's best, or works best for you. And behaviorally, that's what we're kind of trying to focus on here. Is there are lots of different ways to do this, but you need to figure out for you what's going to help motivate you and keep you, reaching towards those goals. Number 3, manage your debt. You need to continue to manage your debt as a part of your overall financial plan. So some ways to do that: set up regular automatic payments. So paying late could hurt your credit. Plus, you get hit with penalties. That's where auto pay can really become your best friend. To pay debt faster, cut expenses from your budget or boost your income by maybe taking on a side hustle. Borrow smart and think hard before you take on debt. If you expect to finance future expenses like buying a home in the next year, take that into consideration in your overall financial plan. For credit card debt, negotiate lower interest rates, call for a lower rate, and you might just get one. Or you could consider a good balance transfer credit card that allows you to move debt to a card with zero interest for a certain period of time. But read the fine print. You want to make sure you don't get caught unaware when the promotion period ends and then the zero interest rate becomes a very high interest rate. Refinance. You could save money, especially since interest rates right now are so low. Or consolidate debt so you can make one payment. Just make sure you check the terms because there may be some fees that are associated with that process. Another strategy, buy weekly payments. This strategy is simple. It's pretty straightforward and it's fiscally sound. Take each of your monthly payments and you split them in half. Make one of those payments every other week on an auto pay. Because there are 52 weeks in the year, you're actually making one additional monthly payment each year. In addition, you're lowering your loan balance more rapidly. Both of those things will save you money on interest. This is especially effective when it comes to longer term obligations like auto loans, student loans, or mortgages. The fifth one, know your credit score. And finally, don't forget to check and recheck it every year. You can request a free copy of your credit report from the 3 major credit reporting agencies, which is Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. And you can do that once a year for free. Paying your loan balances helps, of course. Carrying a lot of debt may affect your score, especially high credit card debt. And lastly, you want to make sure that you correct errors on your credit report as soon as you identify them. Higher scores typically make it easier for loan approvals, access to lower interest rates, and there's some other advantages as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Aviva, and she's going to bring us towards the end of the conversation, talking about 2 very important concepts that tie into financial planning.
There are 2 last terms we want to talk a little bit about as they have a direct correlation on your success in reaching your short, mid, and long-term goals. When working on a budget, it's important to consider inflation. The cost of milk, gas, and other basics will continue to increase over time. Don't forget inflation in your budgeting. Inflation diminishes the real value of money over time. If you're saving in order to provide you a certain income in retirement, for example, unless you take into account that some items will cost more over time, there's a good chance you'll run out of money. As such, in order to be able to meet your budget, we'll need to make sure that your savings and retirement accounts and investments outpace inflation.
Yeah, inflation is important. So another concept you should understand is the power of compounding interest. A great way to understand it is by using the rule of 72. And this is one of my favorite investment hacks. Divide the number 72 by the interest rate, and the result tells you how long it's going to take your money to double. If your annual interest rate was 3%, your money would double every 24 years. If it earned 8%, your money doubles every 9 years. So now let's take a look at what this looks like when comparing 2 savers. We'll call them Jane and Jack, and they're the same age. Jane saves $1,000 a year for 10 years, from ages 25 through 34. Jack's a little behind, and so he doesn't actually start until he's 35. He too saves $1,000 a year, but he does it for up to 30 years when they both turn 65. So at the end, when they both turn 65, you can see that Jane's total investment of $10,000, so that's the total amount that she put in, has grown to $157,000. While Jack, who put in $30,000, has grown to $122,000. That's the power of compounding interest. Your money is making money for you, and the more time it has to do that, the higher the amount will be in the end.
Just a quick interruption here, Holly, for a second. I mean, for those of you who have young kids who've just getting their first jobs, it's a great time to encourage them to start saving in their retirement accounts at work, because in those first 10 years, when they don't have spouses and kids, and maybe the only expense is housing over their head if they're not still living with you, is to put money away for a future day and for retirement, because it will add up to an awful lot. And then, as you see in this example, waiting those 10 years puts you behind the 8 ball where you then have to save for the next 35 years or 30 years, and you're not going to end up with as much as the person who just saved for those first 10.
Exactly. So yeah, compounding interest is super, super powerful. It is a great way for us to grow wealth. And it's awesome when it's making money for us, right? But it's not so awesome when you're paying it. Going back to our conversation on debt, if I carried a $10,000 balance on my credit card month after month, paying only the minimum monthly payment, and my credit card was, say, at a 16% interest rate, it would take 4.5 years for my $10,000 debt to become $20,000 worth of debt. So make sure you're using compounding interest in your favor and not against you. That's really, really important.
So best laid plans can be great, but there are many things that can disrupt them. And those include spending more than you earn, amassing too much debt at high interest rates, not investing to keep up with inflation, and being too overwhelmed to start somewhere. So we came up with these take-home points for you that 1, budgeting helps you on the path to achieving your financial goals. It's important to prioritize those goals. Debt can derail things, so reducing or eliminating debt should be a priority. How you invest your savings impacts your ability to reach those goals. If it's all sitting in the bank earning less than 0.5%, it's not going to even keep up with inflation. And you should bite off what you can chew to get started. Don't just let that huge lurking number out there be so vast that you don't start somewhere. We've pointed out how to set financial goals and use a budget to determine if you're on track. And we don't have the tools that you're in front of you, but we will have them out to you shortly thereafter. We just thought we'd rather you focus on the conversation here. But we'll provide them to you and the tools and resources such as the worksheets that we talked about and links to the presentation as soon as we save the recording and load it up to our website. We're about to answer questions that you may have, but please know that we're available for consulting should you have further questions or want to engage us. And with that, let's get into Q&A. Anyone have any questions on stuff they're dealing with or issues that they're facing or anything they need further clarification on? And Holly, maybe can you bring up a budgeting one, any of the handouts so people can take a quick peek at them?
Sure, let me work on that.
We covered everything so beautifully, there are no questions.
I have a question.
Yes, Kristen.
I don't know if you you didn't touch upon it, but when you mentioned some of yours, when your students have kids have their first jobs and they should start contributing to the retirement fund as early as possible. Mm-hmm. When is a good time, or when do you suggest building credit for someone that young? Meaning, like, when would be a good time to get them a credit card? I get so nervous because I'm afraid they're just going to go nuts with it and ruin their credit. But on the other hand, they actually need it if they want to take out a loan or anything like that. So I just didn't know if anyone had a good age or a good way for them to build credit without allowing them the unlimited range to go nuts, much like their, maybe their mother might, or something like
Holly,
that.
you want to answer that one?
I mean, so Kristen and I have children the same age. I have a 19 and a 17-year-old. I actually, they opened up their first checking and savings accounts when they were 7. And, I started that early with them just because I, like many others, did not do so great with it. It's hard to say if there's an exact time when the best time to do it, but you are right. I mean, they do need to start establishing some type of credit. And so, starting small is a good way to do that. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's a right answer for that, but I think it really depends on your kid, how disciplined they are, and whether or not they understand the ramifications for abusing that and things like that. My daughter actually just moved into her own apartment. It's her first time being on her own. She locked herself out the very first day. But these are things, she recently got a credit card and I was a little nervous about it. And I mean, I do what I do for a living. I'm hoping that has kind of seeped into her. But she's been doing really well with it. But it's great because now she looks at what she's buying in a much different way. I mean, she's much more responsible about it because it's her money and it's her credit that's going to be affected by it. So yeah, I think that's an individualized choice.
I would say,
answer
sure. Who's that?
Hi, it's Linda D. How are you?
Hi, Linda. Go for it.
I came in late, so if you already covered it, I apologize. But just adding to what she's talking about the credit card, I think it's really important to set a limit because I'll tell you what happened to me. I'm not a little kid, but this is what happened to me. I went to charge some shirts for $100 and it went through for $10,000 and I didn't really check it. And then I said, well, let me just look. Something told me to just check it because she seemed a little spacey. So I said, let me check it. $10,000 it went through. And so it wouldn't have gone through if I had less credit on there. So I changed it to $5,000. So nobody can charge those zeros onto it. So I think maybe with a little kid, you have to make a determination of what is the tops that you want them to have for starting credit, because maybe you'd want $1,000 or something, or $500, I don't know. But
Right.
but
Now,
that's an accident that happens, and you need to make them aware that that can happen. They need to check their card each time. One more quick thing. I have a lawyer friend who circles it every time in red. She has a special red pen and she circles as soon as she gets it from, the merchant person, Dunkin' Donuts, whatever, she circles it to like say, okay, I approved of it, just double checking. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't do that, but anyway, thank you.
No, that's great comments. I think, Kristen, you asked a great question. It kind of starts before the credit card. Teaching your kids the value of money. If when they're younger, they have jobs, summer jobs, whatever, and they have to pay for some of their own personal expenses, it does start to teach them the value of money. We've added our kids to our credit cards, and when the bill comes in at the end of the month, I get to obviously see what they've charged. And then we have a conversation around what was this? What was it for? And by the way, we're not paying for that. That's coming out of your pocket. And so we ask them to give us the money to then pay the bill. So this gets them in the mindset of, hey, things have consequences when you spend money. And then when you get to the stage of a kid who's on their own, if they get to see that credit card bill coming in before it's coming to them specifically, I think it does have some effect on the long term. And putting limits on it is a great way to start. If you can have them get a credit card with a limit. Now, once they're of adult age, they could call up and increase the limit. So you got to be careful of what that looks like. If they're on with you, that's a different story.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? So we talked about budgets, and I want to just ask the question again. I see a few more faces here, but how many of you actually do budgeting? We got one. Okay. So if you haven't done budgeting, it may seem overwhelming. And I think that the comment that we made before about you feel like it might then be restricting. Well, it might be if the goal is to create a different financial picture for yourself. Until you see where you're making the mistakes or where you're overspending or how much you're spending on certain things, you won't have an appreciation for where you might tweak it or make changes. And so Holly just put up here the worksheet we have for budgeting for your goals, and it helps you summarize monthly expenses. This obviously is a worksheet. If you use things like Quicken or any other online tools, those will do it for you on the computer, make it a little bit easier than just using a worksheet. But if you start, you'd be surprised. And you use the example, Holly, about trying to lose weight or get healthy, I think is the way you phrased it. If you don't track how much you're eating or what you're putting in your mouth, you don't have a real sense for how many calories or how many sweet things you actually do. So that if you do want to lose weight and you don't even know where to begin, you could, yeah, I'll cut out one meal a day. Well, you might double up at the next meal, etc. It doesn't get you to your end goal. But if you start tracking or you're holding yourself accountable to what you're spending, you have a picture for that. And this is a great exercise to do with your kids too, once you start getting them to be paying for some of their own out-of-pocket expenses. So just tracking and looking, you could go back if you don't want to do it prospectively. You could go back and do it based on your Visa bills or American Express bills or credit card bills, because they usually break out what you're spending on different things. And sometimes it's very eye-opening. I remember my mother used to have I want to say, I guess it's an allowance that my dad used to give her when she stopped working and started raising us. And I want to say it was about $2,500 a month. And then she used to complain that in 10 or 20 years, he hadn't ever raised that. At the same time, she had credit cards that she could use unlimited any which way, anywhere. So even though the cash amount that got put into her own personal account was $2,500 a month, she could spend thousands and thousands of dollars on who knows what. And she really did not have any sense of what living expenses were. And if you're not the person who heads up the household and is really in charge of these things, part of this whole series is about empowering you to at least be aware. It doesn't mean you have to become a budgeting guru. But if something happened to your spouse or the person who is taking care of these issues in the household, then all of a sudden this is thrust upon you, whether you're interested in it or not. And you're going to want to know where to look, what to do, and how to pull things together. And I think I've used this example a bunch of times when I was driving my grandmother's best friends to the gravesite for her funeral. I thought they were going to be talking about, oh, don't you remember Anne and what great times we had doing this, that, and the other thing. Instead, the conversation was how much each of them was earning on their money market accounts and some of their bonds and other investments. Why? Because they'd become widows and they had to learn this stuff for themselves, and they had to do it in their 80s or maybe even later. And it was an eye-opening moment to suggest that we all, even if we're not the ones that have any great passion for this stuff or interest in this stuff, you need to know enough to handle it if you have to, or at least have a voice at the table when these kinds of discussions are happening. So that would be my thoughts there. Holly, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add a little bit to that. The accountability is a huge factor. I mean, when you're held accountable to yourself or to others, then it definitely makes you pay attention a lot more. And the other thing I wanted to say, and we talked about it in the presentation, but I sit down with folks every day and talk to them about, their finances. And one of the things that the theme that I hear all the time is, yeah, I mean, I'm on top of things. I know where things are, and maybe they are. But I always make people sit through the exercise of budgeting and kind of filling this, cash in, cash out exercise, because we may think we understand and we may peripherally kind of yeah, I kind of know it's here and there, until we put pen to paper or really put down those goals and put down those amounts. That's when we really understand oh, okay, well, maybe I overestimated or underestimated in these areas. So, that exercise, I mean, I do it with myself all the time. I'm constantly revising and rechecking that, because I think oftentimes we just, we're kind of trucking along and life's taken over, and we set it and don't think about it again.
Jude, you have a question?
Yes. So to that point, Holly, can you share, I think this is really valuable on so many levels. So thank you for putting this together. But one of the things that I ask the question is how frequently do you go back and check and adjust budgets? Because sometimes things happen, like things you plan, accidents, that you don't plan. So is there some sort of rule of thumb?
Well, anytime you have any kind of life change, you should absolutely go back and check it. So that's the first thing. So any big alterations in your life, of married, divorced, widowed, having a child, accidents, whatever the case, that's when you want to take recheck it and take a look at it. But outside of that, if there's nothing major that's changed in your life, I mean, I go in and I mean, I check it quarterly at least. I maybe do a little bit more than that because I'm a little anal retentive, but I mean, I think quarterly is fine. But you know, whatever that is, whatever that comfort level is for you. I think if you're new to it, if you're new to budgeting and you just haven't had the experience of doing it, I would do it every month. Every month I'd be checking those numbers and making sure that it's good, just until you're comfortable with the process. And then once you feel like you've got it down, then I would just, move out like the quarterly, bi-yearly or biannually.
Biannually. And if you do have things that happen once a year, like a bonus that happens at work, end of year bonus or something, or when you get the refund from your tax returns, those are good times to kind of check back in too, because those are times where there's money coming back at you. And if you haven't already used it or spent it or done something with it, then it's a great time to think through what you want to do with it. Keeping track of every single dollar you spend is a daunting task. But one way to kind of get your hand around these is look at your checkbook or look at your bank account and see what checks went where over the last month, 2 months, 3 months, etc. Those are great ways to get a handle on what you're spending because you may not otherwise know. And just even figuring out what could you do without, what couldn't you? If you like to eat out a lot, that's going to be, maybe that's one of your goals, but that also may be a big expense for you to have to track and to worry about if money is tight or if you're trying to put more towards retirement savings, because you won't get that back if you've already spent it.
That discipline piece is huge. And I'm somebody who used to, like, when I would get stressed out, I'd like to shop and I love shoes. And so the rule I do for myself now is if I feel like I want something, it's a 24-hour rule. If it's over $150, this is my limits. If it's over $150, then I have to wait 24 hours before I purchase something. And I do that because 9 times out of 10, the next day I'm like, yeah, I really didn't want it. I just wanted it in the moment. And we're kind of wired to want things today and not to save things for tomorrow, just as human beings. It's not a natural thing to want to put off gratification. It's delayed gratification. So, these little behavioral, hacks can be super helpful when it comes to actually getting those goals accomplished that you're trying to do.
Linda, do you have a question? Is your hand up electronically or is that just my computer? No, that's my hand. Sorry, it's floating. My pointer turned into a hand when it was hovering over her face. Sorry about that. Any other questions on financial planning or budgeting or anything else that you want to know from us?
I'll make a comment too. I don't know if you have college age children or kids who are getting close to going to college, you're getting ready to launch them. One of the exercises that I would do with clients, I did this in group sessions, education sessions as well, but our kids want what they want and they don't necessarily always understand what the cost is that goes behind that. And so I would I sat down with my daughter when she was ready to go to college and she's like, I want to go to the University of Hawaii. I'm like, yeah, me too. But what is it that you want to study? So she wants to study journalism. Okay, great. But that's not, that University of Hawaii for journalism. So we actually broke it down. I made her sit down with me and we broke down the expenses. And I said, okay, at the end of the day, this is what you're going to owe. Like, this is your responsibility when you walk away and you get your job. Now let's look at what a journalist makes when they first start out. So when we did that exercise, she had a completely different viewpoint. I said, so if your goal is to not live with me until you're 35, then you might want to reconsider what you're kind of thinking about for education. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to go. So she's in Boston now, but it's for children, if you have teenage children, even, I think we don't teach education about financial education early enough. So the earlier you can do it, the better, but have them be part of that conversation. And I did the same thing with my children. We sat down at the kitchen table and I said, this is how much money I make and here's my bills. And the reason I tell people that, they're like, you told them how much money you make? I said, yes, because they're part of the money that's going out the door. I want them to understand that piece of plastic that they see pay for things, there has to be something behind it. And so when I did that, I said, okay, here's what I have left over. And this is what I'm saving for. These are all the things that I'm saving for. So when you ask me for a $500 or whatever, this is why I'm saying no. it stopped them from asking me for things that, were ridiculous, and it made them have an understanding of it. So my whole point is, if you have children, have a conversation with them as early as you can at their level. But that will help, because most of the time we don't get financial education until we're adults. And by then it's usually after we've already kind of created some issues for ourselves. And so the younger you can do it, the better. I'll get off my soapbox on education. I'm also an educator, so I can talk all day long.
Yes, Kristen.
I'm sorry, I have so many questions, but I know you and Holly both talk to a lot of individuals planning for retirement and planning for their financial plans and things like that. Does anybody mention a particular budget that they like best, like a system they use? I know there's like 50-30-20s, there's a 70-30 one. Like if you Google budgeting, you get all of these different ideas and different concepts. I didn't know if there was a popular one that people really liked, or should I just ignore them? Just write down my stuff.
I mean, I think it's subjective. It depends on you, but the 50-30-20, I think is it's a good general rule of thumb. I tell people, at the end of the day, I don't want any money sitting in my checking or savings account. And so I've set it up so that I am so automated in every aspect of my life when it comes to my finances, because behaviorally I need to be. So when my paycheck comes in, my fixed expenses, I don't even see them, right? Because those are things that are going to be there every month. So those are gone. I know very clearly what my discretionary income is at the end of the month. And so that amount of money gets allocated into 4 goals that I have. And so I literally opened 4 high yield savings accounts. It's high yield back then, but 4 accounts, and it goes into those 4 accounts, and I never see it. I don't have a debit card or a credit card with it. So if I want money out of that account, I've actually got to go there and get it, or it takes a long time for me to get it. The reason I do that is a behavioral choice. So I think at the end of the day, you got to figure out what works best for you, but setting your goals and figuring out what it is you want to accomplish short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and being very clear and putting that into focus is going to help you, drive that way. And if you kind of go off track, it's going to help you reset. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different strategies.
Holly, what does a 50-30-20 even mean?
You're going to ask me that, Aviva. You tell me. I think it's 50%, no more than 50% of your, or 30% of your stuff should be on house expenses. You shouldn't be paying more than 30% of your income on houses. 20% is for your future savings. So this is for your retirement, your long-term savings goals. And then the 50% is, I don't remember what's the term, everyday living now.
Needs,
Yeah,
like everyday
needs. Yeah.
Listen, not enough coffee today. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of a specific software. I know people use Quicken and Mint and things like that to track their expenses and their income. But I'd say the only rule of thumb that I've ever spoken to people about is not to spend more than about 30% of what they make on their home, whether it's rent or mortgage or things like that. But it's very individual. And some people are expecting great inheritances down the road. That's great, but you get no time value of money on that. It may all come in at once, but that doesn't mean you should live beyond your means now. But I think the first step is finding out where you're at and making sure you've looked at that.
Yeah. Well, I'll just share a really quick tip with you so I teach, I'm an adjunct professor at the University of New Hampshire. So I work with college age students, and these are freshmen. They're honors students, honors business. They come in with 4.2 averages. They're smarter than me. But one of the things I remember, because I'm always talking to them about personal finance and investments and things like that. And I said, hey, what do you guys do to save money? Like, I'm sure you get allowances for your parents, whatever the case may be, and everyone has different stories. But what do you do to save money if you want to buy something? And I had a student raise their hand, and they're like, "Oh, I use Digit. I'm going to Digit." I was like, "Tell me that. What's that about?" So basically, it's an app that is tied to their checking and savings accounts, and it starts to recognize their spending habits. They know when their fixed expenses are coming in, and they pay those out. So every day it would take a certain amount out of their account, whether it could be $1.25, it could be 38 cents. It just kind of depends on their spending patterns. And then it takes it and puts it into a savings account. And so they never, like, they don't see it leave. It's such a small amount, it doesn't make an impact on them. But I had several of them tell me after that, they're like, yeah, I did that. And that's how I went on spring break. That's how I paid for my new car. I mean, so there's just all these little hacks or habits that you can kind of set up, automate for yourself, gamify it. I love gamification. So gamify it just to help you reach those goals. It just makes it really easy. And if you don't see it, then you don't spend it. So I thought that was kind of a cool hack. But to Aviva's point, you can go online, type in anything, type in budgeting, type in apps, you'll get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of options. So.
All right. Any last questions? I know we're just coming up to 1:30. We don't want to keep you past your time frame. If those who want, we can hang on for a little bit extra for if you've got a specific question for your own personal thing you don't want to say in front of the audience here. But I want to thank you all for participating. We will be sending around a link to this which is being recorded today, as well as all of the tools and worksheets that we talked about that we didn't share before this started. So our next session is coming up. It's going to be on estate planning, and that is towards the end of the month on the 28th of September. And I know who said why we even did these in September, but it seems like if we didn't plug in the dates, we'd never get to them. But that's, I actually have a guest lecturer joining me, which is Melissa Sidney. We're going to talk about estate planning and legacies and things like that. So I know that was of interest when we did the Womenology series to start this all off with. So look in your inboxes, keep an eye open for invites to our other 2 or 3 remaining sessions. And we wish you a wonderful rest of the day. And for those who are Jewish, a happy, healthy New Year. Thanks, everybody.
You so much. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shana Tova, everyone.
Shana Tova.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
See you. Bye-bye.